Welcome to the Basic Excel workshop. Today we're going to be learning the basic functions of Excel by creating a simple budget planner. If you absolutely love Excel after this, feel free to take our intermediate Excel workshop where we make sense of large sets of data by creating pivot tables, applying conditional formatting, creating if statements, and more. Or try out our Excel for Lab Reports workshop where we create charts and graphs and run statistics to help make your lab reports easier. So this is the Google site for this workshop. The URL is at the bottom of the screen. You don't need to visit this this site if you don't want to, but you can. Up on the top right, we have documentation, and if you click on the documentation, it will take you to the instructions that I'm currently going to be reading from. So you can follow along just from hearing it if you would like. You can also download the documentation and be able to follow along with the paper. Okay, so first thing is we're going to open Excel. And then we're going to click on blank workbook. And I'm just going to make it full screen. Now, Excel is free for all Stony Brook students because it is a part of Microsoft Office, so you can just visit software.stonybrook.edu and download it onto your personal computer. So just so that we can get acquainted with Excel, our columns are labeled by letters and our rows are labeled by numbers. You can click whichever cell you would like, and a cell is one of these white rectangles. So I'm just going to click on a random cell. And then up here in the top left, it will tell you what cell you're in. So for example, I am in cell J12. So if we're, working on our budget planner and I say, oh, in cell B13, you can go B and then 13 and click here and know exactly what cell you're in. Okay. So first thing is we're going to look at the bottom down here, at the bottom of our screen. And right now we have one tab that says Sheet 1. So the way I like to think about it is Excel is kind of like your Google Chrome page. So if you click on Google Chrome, it automatically opens up with one tab. And you can add a bunch of different tabs to that one page. But if you X out of that page, it'll close all of your tabs. So one workbook of Excel is like your one Google Chrome page, and you can add a bunch of tabs at the bottom. But when you go to save your Excel file, you're saving all of the tabs. Again, if you X out, you're Xing out of all of your tabs. So if I'm doing something like creating a lab report, I'll create one workbook file for one report, and then I'll add a tab at the bottom for each different graph or statistics test that I'm running. So I'm going to double click here where it says Sheet 1, and instead I'm going to type in Budget Planner 2020. And then hit enter. If I wanted to add more tabs, you can also click on the plus sign over here and add a new sheet if you wanted. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start adding our months of the year. So in cell A1, all the way up here at the top, type in January. So in order to type data into a cell, you only have to click once. You don't have to double click or anything. And then you can just type in January. And then you can hit enter. Now you can also overwrite this text. You don't have to double click or anything. Honestly, you just click on this cell A1, and you can, if you wanted to start the year off with February, you can just start typing February, and it will automatically overwrite the data. Okay. Now, to go from cell to cell, you can either click the next cell, you can also hit enter to go one cell down, you can use tab to go to the right, and you can also use your arrow keys on your keyboard to move all over the place. So now in cell A2, type in February. Now, we could keep going and typing in all the months of the year, but Excel recognizes a pattern, and it recognizes this pattern just with January, so you don't need to also type in February. Now, this is called data filling patterns. So Excel recognizes that January is one of the months of the year. So now we can data fill the rest of the months, so we don't have to individually, type each one out. Okay, So click on cell A1, and when you click on it, you'll see it has this green border around it, and on the bottom right corner, it has this green square. If you hover over that square, your cursor will turn into a black plus sign. Click on that, and by holding it down, just keep dragging it down. So I'm still holding my mouse down, but if I drag it down one cell, you'll see it gives us that suggestion of February. So Excel's saying, okay, in this cell, I would put February. And then if I drag one down, it will say March. So it's saying, okay, in this cell, we'll put March. And now drag all the way down until it says December and let go. Okay, now you will see that we have all of our months of the year. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is add a row above, right? Because now we ran out of room to have a title cell. So what I'm going to do is right click on the number 1 itself for our row and click on insert, and then do the same thing again. So we're going to have 2 rows above January. So again, right click on that number 1 itself and click insert. And now we have 2 rows above. Okay. Now, right now, I'm just going to show you something. So let's say our column A was a lot smaller, and September and November and December bled over into column B, but we only want them to be in column A. What we can do is automatically adjust the column width. So instead of manually clicking and dragging, Excel will automatically adjust the column width to be exactly as long as your longest piece of text. So September is going to be the longest month of the year, as in how many letters it has. So what we can do is go up to the top. So between columns A and B, hover over that line right in the middle so that your cursor becomes the black line with the 2 arrows sticking off of it, and double click. And now you can see it automatically adjusts so that September perfectly fits in that cell. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is add our category titles. So first, up here in cell A1, remember January was cell A1, but now it's cell A3 since we added those 2 rows. So now cell A1 is empty. So we're going to type in Budget Planner 2020. Okay. And now go to cell B2. So again, I just clicked on that cell, and I only clicked once. You don't have to double click. And now I'm going to type in monthly rent. Okay, and now I'm just going to hit tab because I only want to go one cell to the right. And I'm going to type in utilities. And then I'm going to hit tab again to go one cell to the right. I'm going to type in phone. Okay, now I know monthly rent is cut off over here. That's totally fine. We're just going to leave that for a minute. So what we want to do is merge and center our cells. So right now, Budget Planner 2020 is taking up 2 cells. But in reality, we want it to be completely centered over these 4 cells because that will completely center it over our data set. And I'm just going to zoom in a little more so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, so what we can do is we can merge and center. So I'm going to select these 4 cells that I want my text to be centered over. And then under this Home tab over here, I'm going to go to the middle and click on Merge and Center. So if I do that, you can see now cell A1 is this entire cell. Rather than having A1, B1, C1, and D1, I just have A1. Okay. Now, the next thing that we want to do is wrap the text. So Merge and Center will make these columns all into one cell. Wrapping text will do this vertically. So monthly rent takes up more than one cell, right? So it would have bled over into cell C2. I'm just going to select this monthly rent cell, so B2, and I'm going to go right above Merge and Center and click on Wrap Text. Now you'll see that it's making the cell tall enough, because if we made this monthly rent cell longer, then it wouldn't line up with the utilities and phone, right? Everything would look a little bit off. But if we make the cell taller to fit the text, then everything still, like these cells are all still the same width. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can do one more thing to format this planner up here, this title cell. So we're going to manually adjust the column height, the row height. So if I select this cell, I'm going to go over here between rows 1 and 2, and until my cursor turns into the black line with the 2 arrows sticking off of it, I'm going to click on that and drag down. You can drag down as much as you want. I just want to make my cell a little bit taller because it's the title cell, so you want it to stand out the most. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm going to go up here to my different alignment options. So first we have centering text. This is just like it would be centered on your Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word document, so centering your text. But we can also center it with vertically, right? So if we go right above that, we have middle alignment, top alignment, and bottom alignment. So right now it's already set up to the bottom of our cell. But if we click on this middle alignment button, it will completely center it in the cell. So it's centered now vertically and horizontally. Okay. We can also change the color, the font, the size, whatever you would like, just to make this stand out more and make it look a little bit more exciting. So over here we have all of these different font options, same type of thing as in Microsoft Word. So we can make it bold. We can change the font if you would like, just clicking on whatever you want. And you can also make it a little bit bigger. And you can also change the color. Okay. So now we're basically done with formatting that title cell, right? It looks a lot better. Now what we're going to do is add some borders to break everything up. Okay, so select these cells. Now by selecting, all I'm doing is clicking once and dragging my cursor to the right. So I'm just going to click and select these cells. I'm going to add a border, right? Because if we're gonna break up our data from the categories by adding a border. So what I'm going to do is select these 4 cells, and I'm going to go to this border option. So it's right under font. And if you click the drop down arrow, you can see all the different kinds of borders that you can have. So for example, I'm just going to click on bottom border. And now if I click out here, you'll see we have a bottom border. Let's do the same thing. Let's add a right side border to these cells. So again, just click and drag down so that all of your months of the year are selected. And now click on the drop down arrow for your borders and click on right border. Now, while this is selected, let's make this text bold. So I'm just going to click on the B. And now let's do the same thing. So we're going to select these category titles and click on B to make them bold. All right. So now we're pretty much set as far as like having borders and stuff. Actually, let's add one more. So let's go to December and select these 4 cells and click on the drop down arrow and add a bottom border. Okay, now that will separate our data, our raw data, from the formulas that we're going to run. Now in cell A15, let's type in total and then hit enter. And then in cell A16, let's type in average and then hit enter. And then in cell A17, let's type January as in the month of the year and then hit enter. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay. So now what we're going to do is start adding our data. Okay, so first we're going to start with our monthly rent, and it's just going to be $1,500 all the way down. So in cell B3, type in 1500, and don't worry about adding any dollar signs or decimal places. We will add that later on. So now we're going to data fill again. Now we're not data filling a pattern, right? Because it's not like January followed by February followed by March. We're just data filling the exact same 1500, and Excel recognizes that. So again, to data fill, what you do is select your cell once, don't double click, and it'll have this green border around it. if you go to the bottom right corner of this cell, you'll see it has the little green square. If you hover over that green square, your cursor will turn into the black plus sign. Click and drag all the way down, and you'll see it's just repeating 1500 all the way down. So do that until December and let go. You'll see it recognized that it was just supposed to have 1500 all the way down. Now for your utilities. What we're going to do is just put in any number around 100, right? So it could be 100, a little higher, a little lower, whatever you want. So just go ahead and type in, take a few minutes and just type in any number around 100. It doesn't have to be like exactly 100. This is just going to be showing us how to run like the average formula and making sure that it works. Okay, once you've done that, now do the same thing for your phone, but do it around 50. Okay. Now, since we did data filling over here, it took away our bottom border. No problem, just click on cell B14 and click on the bottom border, and it comes back. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is format these cells. So right now we have just plain numbers. We don't have any, like it's not in currency format, so we wanna change that. What I'm gonna do is click and select all of my cells. So I'm just clicking and dragging to select all of my cells. And now under the Home tab, I'm going to go to the middle, and you see we have this, it says General. This is your format for your data. So if you click the drop down arrow, you'll see we have a bunch of different options. We're going to click on Currency. And now you can see everything now has a $sign and 2 decimal places for our 2 cents. But we want to change that because right now we just want to deal with whole numbers. We don't want to deal with cents. So under where it now says currency, we have these increase and decrease decimal buttons. Click on decrease decimal twice. And now you'll see everything is in whole numbers and it now is in currency format. Currency format is going to help when we do the average, because if we had an average of like, you know, say for this, it was like 100.23789, that wouldn't make sense in dollars because we only have 2 decimal places. So in this case, now when we do the average, Excel will keep it to whole numbers. If we had our 2 decimal places, it would keep it to the 2 decimal places. Okay, so now we're going to run our first formula. It is going to be the sum formula. Now, if I was to just type in sum in cell B15, Excel would be like, okay, that's just plain text. But we want it to recognize that this is going to be a formula. So in order to start a formula, you want to type in the equal sign. Now type in SUM for sum and click type in open parenthesis. All right. So once you do your open parentheses, you can select your data that you want to add. So I'm going to do all of my 1500s. So just click and drag down all your 1500s. And now you can see you also could have typed B3 colon B14. So you can do it both ways, clicking and dragging or typing the actual cells. Now close your parentheses and you'll see that dashed line turn into a solid line because now the formula is complete. And now hit enter. So now we should all have 18,000. So if you don't have 18,000, go back and see like what's different from what I have. This basically, this rent column is our calibration to make sure we're all on the same page. And then the utilities and phone, since we switched up our numbers, those will be different. Now what's really cool is Excel can also data fill formulas. So we can data fill patterns, we can data fill regular numbers, and we can also data fill formulas. So in that case, now we can just click on this cell that says 18,000 and now hover over that green square at the bottom right and now click and drag 2 cells to the right. And now you can see we have a total for each of our categories. So what data filling does is, let's double click on this 18,000. If you ever want to see what the formula is, just double click and you'll see it changes some B3 to B14. Now, what Excel did is it copied the same formula and just moved it over one column. So if I double click on my utilities total, it did the exact same thing, C3 to C14. So you guessed it, for the phone, if I double click, it's going to be the sum of D3 to D14. Now in the intermediate Excel workshop, we'll go over like what would happen if it didn't look as neat as this, and then you will see how to fix that. Okay, so now let's go to our average. Now we want to do the average of these three categories. Clearly our monthly rent should be $1,500, but again, this is a calibration column. So again, to start your formula, type in the equal sign. Now Excel is going to recognize that then whatever we're doing is a formula. Now type in average and open parentheses. Again, simple formula, just click and drag all the way down. Remember, don't include this 18,000 by accident. Stop at the 1,500 and then close your parentheses and then hit enter. So we should all have 1,500. Now again, let's data fill this formula to the right. So click and data fill 2 to the right. And now this is why I had said like make it around 100. So mine averaged out to 97. And for here I said make it around 50. Mine averaged to 58. So we should all have different numbers for this, but if it looks like it makes sense, then you should be good. Now the final formula that we're going to do is a little bit more complicated. So in this case, we want to see how many times does January show up. So this formula is called count if. And in this case, we're actually going to be looking at the different criteria for the formula that it asks for, and it'll get slightly more complicated. So in cell B17, type the equal sign, and then type count if, and then open parentheses. Okay, now in this case, we have two sets of criteria. First, we have range, and then we have criteria. So range is blue and bold, so that means that is the part that we're currently working. So what is your range? Our range is going to be the months of the year, because we want to see how many times January shows up. So I'm going to click and drag down for all of my months of the year. I could also type A3 colon A14. Okay, now I'm going to hit the comma, because the comma is going to change. Now criteria is blue. So now we are looking for what the criteria is. Well, we want to see how many times January shows up. So our criteria is going to be January. So I'm going to click on this cell, A3. And now I'm going to close my parentheses. So now you can read this pretty easily. The blue is our range, so January down to December. And the red is our criteria, so January. And once you've done that, you can hit enter. And you'll see it appears one time. Now, this makes sense, right? January shows up once a year. But if you think about this, pretend we're using like a gigantic data set. January shows up like 1,000 times. We don't want to go around counting to 1,000. So if you think about it, like this could be more useful the larger your data set is. Okay. Now the final thing that we're going to do is create a simple chart. Now running these formulas and stuff, this would be, if this is what you're interested in, you might want to take the intermediate Excel workshop, because then we'll go way more in depth with formulas and stuff. But now we're going to work on creating a basic chart. And if you like this chart and you want to learn more about creating charts and graphs, try out the Excel for Lab Reports workshop. You don't have to be in a lab or anything like that. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to create a chart that looks at our expenses for the month of January. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and select my category titles and my data for the month of January. Now once I've done that, I'm going to go up to the top and click on Insert. Now you have all of these chart options here if you knew what kind of graph you wanted to make. But in this case, I'm going to pretend I don't know what kind of graph I want. So I'm going to click on recommended charts. If you click on recommended charts, you'll see Excel takes your data and it says, all right, well, this would make the most sense. So it says right now, clustered column would probably make the most sense. So I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to click on clustered column. Now it will give you this graph. You can click and move it off of your data set. You can make it bigger or smaller if you would like. Now this is going to look slightly different than a Windows computer because I'm using a Mac. If you're using a Windows computer and you select your graph, you'll probably have this plus sign to the right over here, and that will basically give you shortcuts to doing stuff like adding grid lines, axis titles, adding a legend. It's just shortcuts that it doesn't give you on a Mac. So I'm going to do it the long way. You can also do it the long way on a Windows computer, but Windows computers also have that shortcut. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just add a couple of quick formatting options. So when you click on your graph, you get these new tabs at the top called Chart Design and Format. Now, automatically, you might think that stuff such as adding a legend or axis titles is formatting. It's actually under Chart Design. So click on that Chart Design tab, and now go all the way to the left to add chart element. So now just take a quick look at all these different options. When we change our graph type, you'll see that the options change depending on what kind of graph you have. So later on, we're going to change it to a pie chart, and you'll see like things like trend line aren't an option, right? Because a trend line on a pie chart wouldn't make any sense. So you'll see that this Add Chart Element button updates depending on what kind of graph you have. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add axis titles. This is something that's going to go away when I change to a pie graph. So I'm going to click on Primary Horizontal, and now I'm going to get this text box in the middle, and I'm going to double click and change it to Category. And now we can do the same exact thing with our vertical axis titles. So again, Chart Design, and then all the way to the left to add chart element. Click on that, hover over axis titles, and click on Primary Vertical. Okay, now we can double click on this and change it to cost. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my graph and I'm going to change my chart type. So I'm going to go again to Chart Design, and I'm going to go to the right now and click on Change Chart Type. Now I know exactly what kind of chart I would like, so I'm going to hover over pie, and you see there's so many options for each kind of graph. So we have 2D pie, we have a pie of a pie, we have 3D pie, and if you're hungry, there's also donut. I'm just going to click on 2D pie. Notice a couple of different things. So now we don't have the axis titles, right? Because that wouldn't make sense. But our data looks different, right? So now our rent is over here, we have our utilities over here, and we have our phone data over here. Now click on Chart Design and go to the left and click on Add Chart Element. And just notice how everything is basically changed. So right, trend line is not an option anymore. Grid lines are not an option. However, legend and data labels are an option. Okay, first hover over legend. I'm going to put mine at the top, but you can put it wherever you would like. So I'm going to click on top, and now we can really read this. So we figured that monthly rent was the most, but now we can actually see that it is, right? So monthly rent is blue, and the blue takes up the most, utilities is orange, and phone is gray. But I can't look at this, just like look straight at it and calculate, how much money my monthly rent was. I can just see, monthly rent took up the most. However, we can add data labels. So again, click on Add Chart Element, and now hover over Data Labels. So I'm just gonna click on Best Fit because that will determine our phone pie slice is a little bit small. So if I put center, it might overlap with the utilities number. So I'm gonna click on Best Fit. So now we can see how much each of our costs was. So we had $1,500, 150. And if we look over here, that makes sense. So everyone should have 1500 for this blue, and then whatever number you put in for your utilities and phone. Okay. So now that we have completed making our pie chart, that was the last thing that we're going to do. So just remember, if you are more interested in Excel, we have 2 other Excel workshops. If you have any questions, feel free to email the address on the screen, and thank you for watching this video.